Hi everyone! Welcome to this video. What we're going to talk about today is chapter 1 of our textbook. So we're going to start introduce the idea of inquiry. So let's get started. Alright, so most of what we see in the course of, normal life, be it on Facebook, be it on news sites, be it on Twitter, right? We don't really see great examples of people investigating issues. Right? I don't take it that that's me breaking any news, right? I think we all sort of suspect and all sort of agree that we don't really see great examples in the course of daily life, usually, of people really carefully investigating some issue. Why not? Why do things seem as if they go wrong? Well, first of all, before you could actually investigate an issue, you have to not already know the answer. Right? If you already know the answer to a question, you're not going to investigate, right? The best you can hope to do if you already know the answer is win. Prove that your answer is correct without actually, doesn't require investigating anything, right? I mean, I can prove that my answer is correct if I can trick you, right? That will prove that I'm correct. I'll win the argument, right? To actually investigate, you have to already not know the answer, right? Or at least be open to the possibility that what you think the answer is, you might be wrong. We're going to call a good example of investigating some topic. We're going to call that an inquiry. All right. So let's start with just sort of a formal definition of what we're going to mean in this class by inquiry. An inquiry is a careful examination of some issue that's intended to arrive at a reasoned judgment. So I don't think this definition of inquiry should be particularly controversial or surprising to anyone. This is sort of, I guess, what we sort of hope it is that people are doing, right? Say if you go to a doctor, right? You hope that what your doctor is doing is looking at the evidence, analyzing it, and then trying to come to some best answer, best explanation about what's wrong and how it can be fixed. Right? If your doctor was trying to win some debate that they already knew you must have cancer, right? And we're just going to try to establish that conclusion in the face of all of the evidence, you would want to find a different doctor, right? You want a doctor that's going to actually investigate the issue. Okay, so if that's the case, what kind of things do people inquire into? As a general rule, people only inquire into things that there's either disagreement about or things that people just don't know. Then they sort of know that they don't know it. And the reason for that, I think, should be pretty obvious, right? If everyone agrees about some topic, there's not really going to be any cause to investigate it, and an inquiry is a kind of investigation. The only things that you're going to investigate are things where either you just straight up don't know, or where there's disagreement amongst people, and so that you're not clear which of the various answers is the one you should choose. One nice, if you want to call it this way, this sort of upshot of an inquiry, it actually means that disagreements can be really productive, right? If you believe a whole bunch of wrong things, you probably are never going to discover that those things are wrong or incorrect unless there's someone who disagrees with you. That'll be the occasion for you and the other person perhaps to investigate the topic and correct the error, right? Or discover something new. So one nice thing about inquiry, it can actually make disagreements something productive. Alright, so let's go back to that definition of inquiry that we just looked at. Let's sort of break down its parts, sort of define some of the sort of inner workings of it. So we said an inquiry is a kind of careful investigation. What do I mean by careful? What I mean is you have to gather evidence, well, nothing surprising, but you have to gather evidence that both agrees and disagrees with whatever you sort of started off by thinking, right? So let's just pick a concrete example. Let's say I'm going to inquire into what the best kind of deodorant is, for some reason. Okay, so I'm doing that. Alright, well, if I'm doing that, what am I going to do? So I need to gather some evidence about the current brand of deodorant I already use, right? But if that's all I'm looking at, I'm not going to get very far, right? I mean, I'm already using the current brand. If I'm not going to look at anything else, what's the point of the investigation, right? So for an actual inquiry, I have to go beyond looking at the stuff that I'm already familiar with. I have to acquire evidence for things that sort of differ or disagree with whatever I started with. So in the deodorant case, I'd have to start looking at evidence for and against other brands of deodorant, right? Nothing super surprising there, right? You have to sort of just gather information from a variety of different sources. All right. But an inquiry is not just about gathering information. You've got to go beyond that. Okay, so what's next? Next, you have to reach this reasoned judgment. Okay? A reasoned judgment is when you come to some conclusion about what it is that you've been investigating, right? So if I've gathered up all this sort of information about all these different kinds of deodorants, the reasoned judgment would be the conclusion of which deodorant is the best brand to use. We've defined this idea of inquiry really broadly, and that's intentional. That's sort of by design. There's going to be an enormous variety of different contexts in which people can inquire. Now, they're not all going to look the same, and as the semester goes along, we'll talk about differences between different kinds of inquiries. But just in general, that's correct. It's possible for human beings to inquire into almost anything, right? Almost any topic. There are going to be a few things that we can't, but almost anything you can think of is going to be something that people can investigate in sort of a rational and reasoned way. The only exceptions are going to be things where there really isn't actually a disagreement taking place at all, where there really aren't reasons that can be given in defense of something because there's not actually anything that needs to be defended. Let's look at some examples. So let's say that I love broccoli, and let's say that you hate broccoli. All right. Is there actually a disagreement? Are you and I actually disagreeing about anything? Well, the claim that I'm actually going to want to make right now is that we're really not, right? When I say I like broccoli, you're not disagreeing that I like broccoli. You agree, presumably, that I like broccoli, right? But you just don't share my preference. You have a different preference than me. That's not a real disagreement, right? Both things can be true. There's no contradiction. You can dislike broccoli, and I can like it. But, now let's try a different scenario. Let's say that I believe that everyone should eat broccoli. But you believe that that's not true, that it's not the case that everyone should eat broccoli. There, we've got a real disagreement. We're not just dealing with sort of individual preference anymore, right? We can't both be right. You believe something very different than I believe. Our belief contradicts one another. Or, let's look at another example. Let's say that I loved the new Taylor Swift album, and you hated the new Taylor Swift album. Okay. Again, we're not really disagreeing, right? I mean, if I'm not lying, you assume that I really liked it, right? We agree that I liked it, and we presumably both will agree that you disliked it. Where a disagreement would come in is if we shifted it, if I then said, the Taylor Swift album is a good album, and you disagreed. You thought the Taylor Swift album was not a good album. There we've got a real disagreement, right? We can't both be right. I think the album is good, you disagree. One of us has to be right, one of us has to be wrong. Maybe we're both wrong, in fact. Then we've got an occasion for inquiry, right? Then we can investigate which of us is right, gather the relevant kind of evidence. Indeed, what kind of evidence is relevant for evaluating if an album is good or bad? Well, we'll talk about that as we sort of go. It's going to be very different than the kind of evidence you might supply if we were disagreeing about a question in science, or if we were disagreeing about a question of history, right? There's going to be different kinds of evidence that are appropriate in different arenas, but whatever the kind of arena is, if we wanted to actually inquire, and that this includes things like is an album good or bad, we'd have to then start gathering evidence and presenting evidence, making our case. Alright, so hopefully by now you've got at least a provisional idea of what we mean by an inquiry. We'll get clearer as we sort of go throughout the semester, get more examples, but hopefully good enough to start with at least. Alright, so why should we care about inquiries? Why are they good? Why are they valuable? Right? Why is there a whole class dedicated to how we carry one out? All right. Well, here's a couple reasons, right? First reason, sincerely pragmatic, right? It's presumably really dangerous if you have false beliefs about at least some things. Right? Say, do a doctor example, right? If I go to my doctor and my doctor's like, yep, you have cancer, and I don't have cancer, that's bad. Conversely, if my doctor says, oh, no, you don't have cancer, and I do, that's bad too, right? There are all kinds of practical situations where it's really, really important that we get our beliefs right. And, that's probably not particularly maybe right now, super controversial thing to say, right? That there are sort of stakes to many of our beliefs, and getting our beliefs right really matters in a sort of pragmatic sense. Well, inquiry is valuable in those kinds of circumstances because inquiry is a great way of testing to see if our beliefs are in fact true or not. All right, what are some other reasons we might care about inquiry? Well, we were talking about in the last video, right? Human beings take themselves to be rational. We take ourselves to have really good reasons to believe the things that we do. Well, we also said last time, most of the time we're not really being as rational as we think we are. And again, me included, right? All of us, sorry. We're not being as rational as we take ourselves to be. We're sort of falling short of the standard we set for ourselves. Okay, this is another reason why inquiry would be valuable. Inquiry is a great way of testing if we are in fact being rational and holding some belief, and if not, it gives us the opportunity to sort of change that, and so to sort of live up to the standard of rationality that we set for ourselves. Here's another one, the idea of autonomy. Right? If you only don't really ever carry out investigations or any sort of inquiry, and you just believe whatever you hear, right? You know, whatever you read on the internet, whatever you see posted on Facebook, whatever you hear on the news, whatever, right? Then you're not really responsible for your beliefs, actually, right? You don't play any role in the beliefs that you form. This is the idea of autonomy. Autonomy literally means self-rule, right? Where you sort of determine for yourself things, right? Well, inquiry helps you become more autonomous. As a result of the inquiry, you yourself are going to reach a conclusion about what you think is true or false. That's actually pretty cool. I mean, if you think about it, most of your beliefs, I bet you have no idea why it is you really believe them, right? You know, there's a sort of joke I always tell, it's a true story though, where when I was 5, my father told me that dragonflies, if you've ever seen them, they have these really long little tails at the end. He told me that they'd sew my lips shut if one ever got close to me. Right? There was a little needle at the end. All right, so I'm 5. I believe this. To this day, I am still freaked out by dragonflies. Of course, that's not true, right? He was just having his fun with his 5-year-old kid, right? But, you know, I had that belief. Where did I have it? Where does this come from? Not from any place interesting, right? Not from any good reason for it. As a result of an inquiry, you yourself are going to reach a real conclusion about what's true and false, so it's a belief that you can sort of take ownership of. And then lastly, another reason why you might find inquiry super valuable is that it gives us the opportunity to sort of productively disagree with one another, or sort of disagree with one another peacefully, in a sense, right? You know, if we disagree about some, say, a political question, there's kind of 2 broad choices for how we could react to that disagreement. 1, we could punch each other in the face, or 2, we could engage in an inquiry to try to resolve the disagreement in that way. I suppose we could also just not talk about it, but that's not going to go anywhere either ultimately, right? The problem's still going to be there. Inquiry gives us a way of disagreeing with one another productively, in a way that actually will produce good results that'll help us come to better answers and maybe even resolve some of the disagreements. Alright, so we've said a few things about what an inquiry is, about why you might care about inquiry, why we might think of it as a valuable activity. Okay, well, how do we carry out a good one? Well, not going to answer that in this video, unfortunately. That's the entire rest of the semester. Right, that's what this entire semester will be about, is how we carry out good inquiries. But there's at least a few things we can note before we get started, right? There's a few sort of prerequisites. We've said already, inquiry's hard. We don't see good examples of it usually, right? Frequently we see it going very poorly. People trying to sort of resolve disagreements or, you know, reconcile various sorts of problems. Okay. So why is that? Why does it come difficult? Well, there's sort of attitudes you need to start with before you can inquire successfully. The first of these is what we're going to call fallibilism. Okay? And this one's pretty straightforward. You need to just start off with a real acknowledgement that you could be wrong in some of your beliefs. Right? That's why fallibilism, right? You could be fallible, you could be mistaken. Right? If you don't start with that, the inquiry's not going to go anywhere. Right? I mean, why bother, right? I mean, quite literally, why bother investigating anything if you're already convinced you got the answer right? So before you can inquire, you have to first recognize it's possible that what you currently believe is wrong, and that's why you intend to investigate. All right? So as a result, this takes us to the second attitude you need to get started with. We're going to call this one open-mindedness. Okay? Since it's possible that my beliefs could be wrong, I need to go find beliefs that aren't my own. Find beliefs maybe even that disagree with things that I believe as sort of evidence for the investigation. Right? I need to sort of, you know, put it this way, get outside my comfort zone. Right? Get outside the sort of narrow range of things that I already believe or things that already sound good to me and start investigating things that perhaps don't sound good to me. Now, this doesn't mean that I just blindly accept whatever it is I hear, right? I need to sort of maintain a critical attitude. I need to investigate this new evidence just as much as I'm investigating my own belief. One very real possibility of the inquiry, it could turn out that I was right all along, right? That my sort of fears were unfounded and my belief was a true one. It could also turn out to be the case that my belief was a foolish one and I need to drop it in favor of a different belief, right? Both of those are live possibilities, so I just have to be open to both of them, right? These two sort of attitudes, let's call them, this fallibilism and open-mindedness, these are the basic foundations of all inquiry. There's a few more we could talk about, and a few more that I get talked about in Chapter 1, but we'll save those because they're going to come up again right away in Chapter 2. So let's call this the end for this video from Chapter 1. Thank you all very much. Hope you have a good week, and I'll see you in class. Bye!